Okay, all right. Okay, everyone. So, welcome back. And we're going to carry on with meditation instructions and going to see how this unfolds, as they say. So, we're going to start with some instructions about meditation practice itself. That's kind of the beginning of this retreat, and see how the Buddha talks about these things. And then later on move on to those things that are supportive of meditation practice. So first of all, have the basic information and then move on to the kind of supporting meditation or supporting practices afterwards. That's the idea behind this. And for that reason, we're going to start with the very well-known Anapanasati Sutta, which means the discourse on the mindfulness of in-breathing and out-breathing. That's essentially what it means. And one, perhaps the most important in some ways, suttas by the Buddha on meditation practice. And so I want to start with that. How do we decide whether a sutta is important? Yeah, the moment I say that, I can sort of hear some people say, yeah, what do you mean Anapanasati Sutta? Surely Satipatthana Sutta is more important. Or they might say something really unusual. Who knows what people might say. And so the question is, well, what are the most important suttas of the Buddha? Is it possible to really to classify them and to give a hierarchy of importance? Or are they all important? And in one sense, all of them are obviously important, assuming that they come from the Buddha, assuming that they come from an awakened mind, they're going to be important. On the other hand, those suttas that the Buddha talks or mentions again and again in a variety of different settings, with slightly different maybe angling on the topic to different people, well, obviously they must be more fundamental to the spiritual life. That is why the Buddha talks about them again and again in all kinds of different contexts and in different ways with slightly different emphasis and so on and so forth. And so that is a very good way of thinking about what is the most important part of the Dhamma, what are the things we should focus the most on. And that is not often the case in the Buddhist world. Very often people want to argue about the obscure things because there is more to be argued about when it comes to obscure things. An argument is fun, right? You get in an argument with somebody and you have to kind of prove your point. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's exasperating, depends a bit on the context. And so this is what people often focus on. And that is, so you can, of course, have discussions about obscure points of Dhamma. It is not wrong to have discussion about those things. And sometimes it can be fun, and sometimes it will lead to a deeper insight and understanding of the teachings. But what we should not do is to rely on those obscure passages to guide our practice. And that is where often people go wrong. You take some obscure thing and that becomes the guidance for how you live your life as a Buddhist, as a monastic, or as a upasaka. That is where the problem arises. So if you want to understand the nature of the path, if you want to understand what it is that we are supposed to do, how the practice unfolds, go to those suttas that the Buddha. You find many, many varieties of the same kind of sutta again and again. Those are the suttas that are important. And of these suttas, the Buddha mentions the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas. These are kind of is what he himself says is the core of his teachings. And these 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, the 37 principles or qualities on the side of awakening or that aid awakening. These are the Bodhipakya Dhammas. They are, says the Buddha, essentially a summary of his teachings. This is what he taught. And that in itself is actually a very interesting fact to be aware of. If you start to look at what those 37 are, you will see that they are taught again and again in the suttas. You go to the Samyutta Nikaya, the last book of the Samyutta Nikaya, called the Mahavagga or Maggavagga, depending on which edition you have, that has basically discusses those 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas. And they are, if you analyze them and you kind of pull them apart, these 37 factors, you get a very clear sense of what the Buddhism is about. Because of those 37, the ones that you see multiple times among those 37, let me just mention what the 37 are. So the 37 are the 4 right efforts, the 4 mindfulness meditations, that's Bhante Sujata's translation, or the 4 applications of mindfulness, or however you want to translate it. The 4 ways to spiritual power, the Iddhipadas, that's 4, that's 12. The 5 spiritual faculties, Panchindriya, the 5 powers, Bala, Panchabala, that's 10, that's 22%, that's 12 plus 10, that's 22. Then you have the 7 awakening factors, Satta Sambhujanga, and then you have the Noble Eightfold Path, the Adhyatangika Magga coming last. And so 22 plus 7, 29 plus 8, 37. Okay, got it right. You never know what's going to add up or not when it comes out on the other end. So I've got that right. So 37 here. So 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas. So you recognize those sets straight away. Now, if you pull these apart and you look at the individual factors, the factors that you see the most in there are 3. Right effort, Sammapadana, or the equivalent in the other sets, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. Samadhi, mindfulness, and effort. These are the 3 things that occur again and again among these ones. So in a sense, you could say that this is almost like the core of what Buddhism is about. And of course, these factors are really about the cultivation of the mind. That's what these 3 are about. So the cultivation of the mind, you could argue, is really what Buddhism is about. And there are other factors too you could bring in, but these are the things. So cultivation of the mind means directing your mind in the right way, having metta, loving kindness, rather than anger and ill will, understanding the impermanence of the world, reflecting on that, cultivating your mind in that direction, understanding non-self. All of these things are part of that. And then the meditation part, the satipatthana, and then the samadhi coming as a result of satipatthana practiced in the right way. So this is kind of one way of thinking about these teachings, and you will see that this is what you find almost everywhere in the suttas. The suttas tend to be very practical. There's very little what I would call philosophy. It is basically about how and what to do and how to practice and how to achieve results, which makes sense because the Buddha wanted to help people out of dukkha. That's what his life was about. It was a life based on compassion. That was kind of the entirety of his life. So this is what it is about. So what then about Anapanasati? How does that fit in with this? And Anapanasati is, again, one of these ways of thinking about meditation that you find in many, many places in the suttas. Anapanasati Sutta is one. Then you have the Anapanasati Samyutta, which is a collection of suttas on Anapanasati. And then you have scattered references to Anapanasati throughout the suttas. Talking about it sometimes just as a group, the mindfulness of breathing, sometimes breaking it up into the 16 steps, etc., etc. So you find it a lot, and so for that reason, it is one of these important teachings. But also, and we'll show you this in a second, what is very interesting about them is that the Buddha says they fulfill the 4 satipatthanas. In other words, this is equivalent to practicing satipatthana. If you practice mindfulness of breathing, then you fulfill this. And we have just seen before that the satipatthanas are part of the 37 aids to awakening. And so, in a sense, Anapanasati also becomes part of that as a consequence of that. So this core part of the teaching, that's kind of the case I want to make at the beginning here. And the suttas that I have picked out tend to be suttas of that sort, suttas that are core. Not all suttas, some suttas will not be so core, but sometimes they illuminate an aspect of the core teachings, so they kind of fit in with the teachings, the larger scope, a larger view of the teachings. And that is then what makes them interesting, because they illuminate an area which may not be explained properly elsewhere. And this is how then you come to an idea of what to focus on in the suttas. And this is why Anapanasati is interesting here. So let us get into this sutta. And Deepika has kindly printed it all out. So thank you so much, honorable Deepika. We say venerable monks and we say honorable for the usually they call the right honorable gentleman or the right honorable lady is kind of what they call the parliamentarians. And I think the Buddhist upasakas and upasikas deserve that title much more than many of these scallywags in parliament. I mean, some of them are probably very good people, but we shouldn't exaggerate. I think it's sometimes a bit of a bad habit to be too negative about our parliamentarians, because they are doing a very difficult job. But still, they don't have the same integrity as a good layperson in Buddhism. So honorable lay people. Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so let's see. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Is that okay with everyone? You can't see here. Okay, so you probably won't need to see all that much, because I'm going to be reading very slowly. So if you just follow me, you take notes. Okay, okay, all right. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay. All right. So this sutta is found in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle-length sayings of the Buddha, number 118. Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing here. So this is how it goes. And this translation is by Bhante Sujato, and you will recognize that straight away. There's a few things in his translation you know immediately who has translated. There's no doubt at all. He has his kind of stamped by the Bhante Sujato mark. And as we see that as we go through this. And it's interesting. One of the things that people say sometimes, I don't want to read all these different translations, people say different things, I get really confused, and what does it mean? But actually, if you're really interested in the suttas, it is very useful to read different translations, because often there isn't one right translation, there's no such thing here. And by seeing it from different angles, you get a broader view and a broader understanding of what is going on. So please don't despair too much. When you start out, stick with one person, your favorite monk, Bhante Sujato or whoever, stick with that. But then later on, expand a little bit. Read a bit of Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation maybe, or Ajahn Nissaro. I'm not so fond of him, but you can read him as well a little bit if you like. And then you can kind of expand out your understanding here. Anyway, so this is how it goes. So I have heard. At one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in the eastern monastery here. The stilt longhouse of Megara's mother, together with several well-known disciples, such as the Venerable Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, Mahakassapa, Mahakachana, Mahakotita, Mahakappina, Mahachunda, Anuruddha, Revata, Ananda, and others. So that's already a really exciting introduction, isn't it? Wow, what's going on? How come so many senior disciples? These are all the most famous monks, at the time of the Buddha. If you go to the Anguttara ones, you find the chapter of all the leading monks, all the leading nuns, the leading laymen, and the leading laywomen are all summarized in there. And this is like a roll call of all those leading monks, basically, almost. Not everyone is there, but some of the most important ones certainly are. So how come all of these monks are gathered together on that day here? But first of all, Buddha is staying in the eastern monastery. This is the Pubbārāma. Pubba is east, Arama is monastery. This monastery was given by Visakha. Visakha is known as Megara's mother in the suttas. Visakha is called in the same passage in the Anguttara ones. She's called the greatest benefactor of the Sangha, a female benefactor of the Sangha. So she's like the most generous. And she gave this monastery to the Sangha. That was her job. Not her job, that's what she did. I'm not sure what her job was, but that's what she did. And so it's interesting. This is Savatthi. On the one hand, in Savatthi, you have the very famous lay donor, Anathapindika, the layman who gave the Anathapindika's monastery, the Jetavana. And then on the other side of the same town, it's one of the largest towns in ancient India, you then have Visakha, who gave a monastery here. So you have like the number one lay supporter of the male and the number one lay supporter female on the other side. So you can maybe start to understand why the Buddha stayed in Savatthi so much, because the support was so good. Yeah, super duper support. King Pasenadi, who was the king of Kosala, he also lived in Savatthi. Yeah, this is kind of where he had his compound, the royal compound, and the Buddha would go there for alms very often. King Pasenadi would come to the Buddha. Some of the most sweet and endearing conversations in the suttas are between King Pasenadi and the Buddha. They're really nice. It's called the Kusala Samyutta, found in the Samyutta Nikaya, the third chapter of the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Buddha. And he is a bit sort of bumbling king, the King Pasenadi, but that kind of gives him a sort of sweetness about him, which is kind of nice. So this is Visakha, usually known as Lady Visakha, who gave this monastery here. And there's a kind of remarkable story behind how that monastery was built. It was built through the psychic powers of Venerable Mahamoggallana, if you are to believe the story. That's not mentioned in the suttas, but mentioned in the commentaries. So it's probably a little bit legendary here. If you go to Savatthi today, I've just been there, then you get taken around, and the guides of India, they tell you, this is Megara's mansion, it was here, this was there, this was there, this is Savatthi was here, Anathapindika's monastery was there. And I tend to be a bit skeptical when I hear these things. I don't believe this thing kind of straight away. And so I tend to ask for the archaeological evidence. And they're not usually very happy when I ask about that, because they have learned these things. They've been to school, they've learned them by heart. They haven't really learned to be critical. They have learned to be guides, basically. And so it's a bit unfair of me to ask those questions. But that is the kind of question we should ask. What is the archaeological evidence? Because there is real archaeological evidence for many of these sites. There is no doubt where Anathapindika's monastery is, for example. The evidence is very strong. And many of the other sites, they have found like seals with names, Kapilavastu. There was a long time a very strong controversy. Where is Kapilavastu? Yeah, where the Buddha grew up. And the Nepalese were claiming, no, it's in Nepal. The Indians said, no, it's in India. Yeah, and back and forth, and no one could really decide. And these are very valuable places for these governments, especially for Nepal. Nepal is a small country. If they can get a bit more tourist dollars or tourist whatever, yeah, they are very happy. And so they want Kapilavastu to be in Nepal. But that is not evidence, that's just desire. And as we all know, desire distorts the evidence. And so they were getting it a bit distorted until they found and excavated a place in India, and they found the seals on the seals. The seals are like little medallions or something, right? Which has a kind of often a kind of a image of something, and then it might have something written on it. And so the seal said Kapila Vastu. And when they found lots of them, right, large number of them there. And once that had been found, then the argument was over. Now we know where Kapila Vastu is. But Megara's mother, there isn't really any evidence. And so if you do go to India, be careful to go to the places that have a sense of, sometimes you feel like there's no atmosphere there. There's nothing. Yeah, it kind of feels really empty in a sense. And going to those places, it's not inspiring. It doesn't do anything for you, for your spiritual practice. And so go to those places that have a good, a solid kind of foundation for being part of, where the Buddha actually was, and not those places that are a bit dodgy. But we know it was there, and so we know that it must have existed at the time. And in this place, the Buddha is staying there with a large number of disciples. And so this was Lady Visakha's donation. So why are all of these disciples mentioned? What is the point of this? And I think the point of these sort of things, when you mention that all of these monks were there, and actually this is only the beginning. I have taken out, you can see the little dots there, that usually means that I have kind of contracted the text a little bit, because then the text goes on to say that one monk would teach 10, another monk would teach 20, another monk would teach 30. So if you add all of that up, it must have been hundreds of monks at Megara's mother's house at that particular time, at this monastery. So a large Sangha, together with so many famous ones. So why is this mentioned? And I say the reason why it is mentioned is to make it clear that this was an important occasion. Yeah, this was special. All of these super duper monks were assembled there, maybe come there after the rains retreat to pay their respect to the Buddha and to show their appreciation. And that means it is a very important occasion. So these are some of the kind of markers of the importance and significance of what is being said. Yeah. So this is kind of the meaning here. And that means is another thing to show that the Anapanasati Sutta is really important. Yeah, this is kind of what this does. It establishes that foundation through these sort of markers. Then the sutta goes on to say that they were doing all of these disciples being taught, and they all achieved really awesome states of mind. Ulara, what was it again? Ulara means like elevated, special states. And they did that through various meditation techniques. Some practice Satipatthana, some practices Metta, some Karuna, some focusing on Anicca. There was this vast number of things that people were focusing on here. And then, at the end of all of those various ways of contemplating the Dhamma, those various approaches to meditation, then the Buddha said, and now I will teach you Anapanasati here. And it's almost as if he's saying, well, this may be the most important way, the core way, the kind of the centerpiece of all of these different meditation techniques. And Anapanasati is what will take you all the way to awakening. It's almost as if these other ones have more of a supportive quality, but this is kind of the core way of practicing. So again, this feeling that what this sutta is saying the importance of this. I shouldn't overestimate this. Maybe I'm making too much out of it because, there are whatever overcomes the defilements, whatever takes you forward on the path is good. Still, it is kind of interesting how much it is emphasized, this particular case. So, so many nice monks here. Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamoggallana, Venerable Mahakassapa. They all have the kind of special strength in the Dhamma. Some of them are really good with analytical description. Some are really good at this, saying what the Buddha said in brief, saying that in length. Some of them are good with ascetic practices, etc., etc. They're all very special. I don't know if you have your favorite monk, who you kind of you feel kind of leaning towards. Maybe you have your favorite nun, or maybe your favorite layperson, whoever it might be. But often there is you can see there's a tendency to like certain people. And even at the time of the Buddha, it was like that. Like-minded people tended to hang out. There's a sutta, that's actually right, that's in the Dhatu Samyutta, I think. Dhatu means like element or property. And in that sutta, the Buddha goes on, all those who were wise, they were disciples of Sariputta. All those who were intent on psychic powers, they were the disciples of Mahamoggallana. All those who liked to memorize the suttas, they were disciples of Ananda. And all those who were dodgy, they were disciples of Devadatta, right? So that was kind of how it was. Everyone, depending on your inclination of mind, you will hang out with people. So that's kind of fascinating here. So that's why it is so important to be careful about who you take as your friends. Because this is exactly what happens. We tend to incline towards those people who we are like, who we are similar to. And don't allow that to take over your life. Sometimes you need to ask, have I chosen good friends? Or maybe I have been stupid. Am I just following my defilements, following my propensities, just going along? So all of these things is useful information to make sure that you are heading in the right direction. Anyway, so now, mendicants, when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it is very fruitful and beneficial. Mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation. The 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 awakening factors. And the 7 awakening factors, when developed and cultivated, fulfill knowledge and freedom. Knowledge and freedom is the very end of the path. Vidya and vimutti, knowledge and freedom. So you fulfill that, it means you are an arahant. You have done what had to be done. There's nothing more to be added. You have fulfilled the spiritual practice. So this is where mindfulness of breathing takes you. That's why the Buddha says it is very fruitful and beneficial. Mahapala Mahanisangsa is the Pali behind that. So usually the Buddha doesn't kind of overstate things. So when he says it's very fruitful, it means very, very fruitful and beneficial. So, but you will notice here, two words straight away that are really important here is developed and cultivated. So mindfulness of breathing takes time, and you need to kind of keep on applying yourself again and again and again, developing this, understanding what the hindrances are, what is stopping you, why doesn't it work? And one of the dangers of Buddhism that you see very often is people treating meditation almost like a ritual. Okay, every day at certain time I sit down and I meditate, and every day at certain time I nod. And you never really ask the question, why am I nodding here? Why isn't it working here? Why is there no progress? So if you treat it as a ritual, it means you don't actually ask those very important questions that will actually take you forward. And so be careful, because this is a very easy trap to fall into. So when the Buddha here says develop and cultivate it, it means again and again, it means investigating, understanding, trying to find out why it is that you're stagnating, why you're reaching a plateau, what is hindering the progress. And it's very useful at the end of every meditation, and I recommend you to do this, is to look back, take a minute or two at the end, and look back at what happened. Okay, today, it was great. Why was it so good today? What did I do today that was different? And you will find that the things that you do are often very simple things that actually make a massive difference to your meditation. Sometimes it's just that you really relaxed for once, right? Actually, I didn't do anything today. Today I really just chilled. And actually now it was much better. That's very interesting. You just sit there against the wall, you think you're being completely lazy, and then suddenly it happens. And then you will see that that ability to really just let be, as I mentioned before, together with, and this is the other thing that was happening at this time and why it worked, your mind was inclined in the right direction. Your mind was inclined towards peace. Your mind understood why meditation is important. And so your mind was like a good dog, well-trained dog, just tuk, goes to the right direction, heads in the right direction. I don't mean that in a bad way, that your mind is like a dog. I just mean that it is well-trained, right? It does the right kind of thing, And so this is such important idea that we need to always investigate and ask these kind of questions if we want to be successful in meditation. And I'm assuming that most of you have some interest in that, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here. So developed and cultivated. Then the Buddha goes on, mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation. So this is, again, very important idea, because very often people struggle to know exactly what is mindfulness meditation, what are the 4 satipatthanas. And you will find a large number of people in the world teaching Satipatthana in different ways. You have the Goenka method, you have the Mahasi system, and you have a large number of Burmese teachers that you will never have heard of even, because Burma is such a lot of the internal teachers, you never even know about them. And almost all of these teachers, they have their way of understanding Satipatthana, their kind of method of doing it. But I say that the Buddha gave us Anapanasati as the way to fulfill Satipatthana. He says here that if you practice Anapanasati, you fulfill the 4 Satipatthanas. He doesn't say that about anything else in the sutras. It's the only thing that he says this about. And so you can use Anapanasati all the way. It's all that you actually require for fulfilling the path of meditation, Sammasati, the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that is incredibly useful, because for many people it is very hard sometimes to navigate this terrain. Should you follow Goenka? Should you follow Mahasi Sayadaw? And I'm not saying that any of them are wrong, necessarily. I'm just saying that this is their technique. Why don't we go back and ask what the Buddha taught? The Buddha is the originator of this. If anyone understood how to do this, it would be the Buddha. We may have doubts about Goenka, you may have doubts about Mahasi Sayadaw, you may have doubts about Ajahn Brahm, you may certainly have doubts about me. But when it comes to the Buddha, no grounds to have doubt, really, because if the Buddha didn't know what he was talking about, well, then there is nothing. There is no Buddhism. There is nothing going on there. And so come back to the word of the Buddha is very, very helpful in these kind of situations. And so the Anapanasati fulfills the four satipatthanas. That is all that you have to do here. Yeah? You can, of course, argue that maybe we should do a bit of body contemplation, that sort of thing. Maybe you should, yeah, depending on things. Maybe that's a good idea sometimes. But basically, Anapanasati is the way here. It makes things very easy compared to what it otherwise might be here. Then we have the Buddha says that the four kinds of mindfulness meditation, in other words, the four satipatthanas, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of awakening, the Satta Sambojjhanga. Yeah, so Satta Sambojjhanga, so what are they? They are basically about samadhi. The Bojjhangas culminate in samadhi. The 6th one of the 7 is samadhi, samadhi sambojjhanga. The 8th one is the upekkha sambojjhanga, the equanimity sambojjhanga. And both of these come from samadhi. They are basically the jhanas. That's basically what they are. And all the factors prior to that, the first 5 of the 7 factors of awakening, well, they are all also factors of samadhi that you need to develop and cultivate for samadhi to arise. So the Bojjhangas, awakening factors, are all geared towards samadhi, the unification of the mind, the bringing together of the mind, the stillness of the mind, the immersion of the mind. Yeah, just bringing out Sudatta's translation of samadhi here. And that is what they are geared towards. So the purpose of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and this is really, really interesting here. The 4, not foundations of mindfulness, what am I saying? It's completely wrong translation. The 4 mindfulness meditations, or the 4 applications of mindfulness, yeah, the purpose of it is to reach samadhi. And that is kind of really extraordinary. It is not just in this sutta that you see that. You see this throughout the suttas. Yeah, if you look at the Noble Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path is a causal path where one factor leads to the next one. So it starts with right view, goes through all the silas, and then coming to right effort, then coming to satipatthana, then coming to samadhi. One thing leading to the next one. And when you read the sutta, this is how it is everywhere. The purpose of satipatthana is to reach samadhi. And it's an extraordinary thing, because that is not how most people would understand satipatthana practice. They might agree that there is a samatha component to it, maybe they would agree with that, but very often satipatthana is, the focus is vipassana, the focus is insight, the focus is understanding. Whereas in the suttas, the word of the Buddha, the focus is always samadhi. This leads to samadhi, this leads to stillness. That is incredibly interesting and incredibly important, because it kind of makes things a bit different from how we normally look at things. So this does not mean that insight is irrelevant. It is relevant, because satipatthana can also include insight, but that insight, that purpose of that insight in satipatthana is samadhi. Everything is focused on samadhi to begin with. And only then, once that samadhi has been achieved, well, then you are ready for like the real insights on the path, the ones that really are life-transforming and changes everything here. Satipatthana leads to samadhi here. And then the last one, the 7 factors of awakening, when developed and cultivated, fulfill knowledge and freedom, vidya and vimutti here. Yeah, so the samadhi is the cause for awakening here, not insight. Yeah, insight, of course, awakening itself is a kind of insight, but samadhi is the cause, not some kind of insight meditation or anything like that. Samadhi is what actually leads to this, as long as the samadhi is based on right view. If it isn't based on right view, it will not lead to this, but otherwise it will. So this is why there is a lot of focus among certain teachers on samadhi, because it is really, really fundamental for the way the whole path works. The Noble Eightfold Path ends with the 4th jhana. Yeah, the 4th jhana is like the culmination of the samadhi of the Noble Eightfold Path. And when you get there, well, the path has come to an end. You have done everything you need to do. And the outcome of practice in the 4th jhana then it's almost automatic. Yeah, you become enlightened. Whether you want to or not, you become enlightened. Oh no, I made a mistake. It's too late to turn back at that point. Now you are enlightened. Got to know. Of course, enlightenment is the highest happiness. That's the whole point of it. So no one would normally complain. You don't see many sad arahants around. Oh no, I'm an arahant. Oh, it's terrible. Can you imagine? And so the 7 factors of awakening, they fulfill knowledge and freedom. Yeah, knowledge and freedom. Knowledge is vidya. I would call it insight. I think knowledge is, to me, is a bit too kind of academic or scholarly or university-based knowledge. Whereas insight precisely is this other factor of seeing things deeply and properly. So knowledge, so I think insight, we should change it to insight. Ajahn Brahm translates vidya as insight. I don't agree with all of Ajahn Brahm's translations, just to be clear. So because I have to kind of stake my credentials here as an independent translator. If I agree with everything Ajahn Brahm says, and I don't have any independence, no one is going to believe me. So just to make it absolutely clear, I do disagree with Ajahn Brahm, but in this case, I agree with him. So just to be clear about that. So vidya is insight. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of thinking about it, because this is what Buddhism obviously concerns, insight, seeing things deeply. Yeah, and insight, of course, is very closely related to the idea of wisdom. Yeah, if you have insight, it's like, wow, now I see. That wow, now I see is also wisdom. And so insight and wisdom are very, very closely connected to each other. And that is why vipassana should not be translated as insight. Vipassana doesn't really mean insight, it means seeing things clearly. You see how the previous Buddha, Vipassi, how he is described in the suttas. He's described as someone who can see far away. He can have a legal case and kind of adjudicate in a legal case, and he sees what is going on. This has nothing to do with insight so much as clear seeing, understanding how the various things kind of fit together. So clear seeing, I think, is a closer thing, closer translation, a better translation of vipassana than insight. And insight should be reserved for these very important understandings of the nature of the mind that you have here. And I did once write to Bhikkhu Bodhi, because I know Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi reasonably well. I have visited him on a couple of occasions. And I did write to him, and I said to him, well, actually, we shouldn't translate vipassana as insight. I said, and he was doing that, right? So I felt a bit... So I was kind of, but he's a very open person. It's actually very nice to write to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. He's very, very open and for feedback and everything. And I said we should translate as clear seeing. And to my surprise, he agreed with me. But then he said, I agree with you, but we cannot change the translation because the translation is so ingrained in Buddhist circles that we have to stick with the old translation. So I'm not very happy with that. But anyway, I had to accept it. So he has a point, of course. So anyways, this is about insight, wisdom. The wisdom, the greatest faculty of a human being or any kind of being. Wisdom is the faculty that keeps all the other faculties, all the other aspects, good aspects of a person together. Wisdom is what enables you to understand things in the right way. Wisdom is what enables you to treat people in a correct way that is conducive to harmony and conducive to well-being, both for yourself and for the other person. Wisdom has everything else in the Dhamma included within it. Everyone wants to be wise. Well, if you are wise, that is, you want to be wise. But if you're not wise, sometimes you may not want to be wise. But wisdom is, has this kind of draw to it that is very powerful. And so, so it leads to wisdom, the highest kind of wisdom, this path. This is one reason why it is so interesting. And if you are wise, obviously the outcome is going to be happiness. That's almost like the definition of wisdom. Wisdom means that you know how to navigate things, navigate your life, navigate the spiritual path, navigate the ups and downs of the world, navigate your role in society, whatever it might be. So of course, wisdom must always come with a sense of happiness, a sense of something positive in your life. When you have a right view, you can make good decisions. If you've got a wrong view, your decisions are going to be bad. That's kind of goes without saying. And so once you have the wisdom, you have the vijja, you also have the freedom. The freedom is here a stand-in for happiness. The liberation from the suffering, the liberation from all the things that bind you down, the defilements that kind of encroach on your mind, make your mind small and limited, make you see the world from the wrong point of view. You have a vested interest in stupid things that you really shouldn't have a vested interest in, etc., etc. So it's a freedom, it's a liberation. We are, every one of us, we are in prison. This is the thing, we are in prison, usually without knowing it. It's a very strong metaphor or simile we have here. Yeah, we are in prison. This is why it is called freedom, vimutti. You're liberated from something that holds you down, that makes you small, that kind of doesn't enable you to express yourself fully. One of those interesting things that we sometimes discuss is the idea of free will. What does free will mean? Does it really mean anything? Is there such a thing as free will? Well, if from a Buddhist point of view, a free will is to eliminate all of those blockages in the mind that stop you from doing what you really want. That is free will. Because really what we would want to choose, we want to choose happiness. But we can't choose happiness. We can't choose samadhi. We can't choose the liberation of the mind. We can't choose to have metta all the time. And the reason we can't choose it is because we are hindered and obstructed by the defilements of the mind. So in other words, the free will means that those hindrances and obstructions are removed. So then you can actually will towards your own happiness. This is a very different idea of free will from what we have in the Western philosophy. The Western philosophical idea of free will is kind of useless, right? You can choose between an apple and an orange. Okay, big deal. That's kind of completely irrelevant. What matters is able to choose those things that are truly significant in life. And those things you can only choose when the obstacles are taken away and your mind is freed from those things. Then you can make good choices. So this is the idea of freedom. We have to get out of prison. Otherwise, your free will is limited to the prison cell. Like Ajahn Brahm likes to say, you can choose between painting your cell green or blue or red or pink or yellow or whatever. Yay, my prison cell is yellow. Hooray! Now I'm happy. No, you're not. You're still in prison. And that's the problem. All right, so the beautiful words, and sometimes just reflecting on what these words actually mean is very useful, yeah? Insight and freedom. I mean, these are very beautiful words. And sometimes we go past it too quickly without really understanding the significance of these things. These things are really, really significant. To be wise and to be free is something very, very powerful, a very powerful motivating factor, if you understand what is meant by this. Okay. So now we come to the actual practice. So how is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated to be very fruitful and beneficial? And the Buddha says, so how do we do this? It is when a mendicant, this is how you know Bhante Sujato, mendicant, is the only one in the known universe who translates monk or bhikkhu in this way here. Gone to a wilderness, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down cross-legged, sets their body straight, and establishes mindfulness in front of them. Just mindful they breathe in, mindful they breathe out. So, mendicant, is a nice word. I think it's a really good one. It is obviously gender neutral, which is one of the reasons why he used it. And I think, and that's kind of nice. It's nice to be inclusive because these suttas were spoken both to monks and nuns. Often they were also spoken to lay people, so it's still not entirely inclusive. The lay people are left out. It doesn't mean you don't count. It means that you are assumed to be present in the audience. But very useful at the very least to bring in the bhikkhunis as well. And it's kind of fascinating. One of the things, I can't remember who pointed this out to me, maybe it was Bhante Sujato, but the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha always starts off by saying, bhikkhus, bhikkhus, listen. But that is in the Theravada version or the Pali version, but in the Sarvastivadin version of the Satipatthana Sutta, it says bhikkhus and bhikkhunis listen, right? And so this gives you the feeling that who the Buddha is addressing is a bit random, and very often that has been decided by editors of these texts. And because it has been decided by the editors of the text, I think it is okay to kind of make it more gender neutral in this way, because we know that both the nuns and the monks were present in those days. It's nice to feel included. It's not nice if you feel excluded. And I think that's really a really important point, actually. So, for that reason, I agree with mendicants. It's also a very precise word. It means exactly the same thing as bhikkhu and bhikkhuni. It means someone who lives on alms. The drawback with mendicant is that it's not a very common word. So people will say, mendicant? What are you talking about, mendicant? They've never heard this word before. You have to look it up online. But once you get used to it, it's kind of nice. So then we have gone to a wilderness, aranyagato, to the root of a tree, or the foot of a tree, rukkamulagato, or an empty hut, sunyagaragato. So this already is important information right there, because what this means is that anapanasati is a profound practice, and that is why we can expect it to be difficult sometimes. We can expect maybe not to make such quick progress. Maybe we have to do a lot of preparatory practices to be able to get there. It is profound. You do this in empty huts. And this is one of the reasons why we have retreat centers, because they are like halfway houses, between the home life and living kind of in the kuti in the forest. So this is pretty good. This is quite nice. Get away from your ordinary life, your ordinary possessions, your ordinary attachments, and then come to a place like this. So, does everyone have single rooms here, Deepika? Is that, or okay, that's pretty cool, actually. That's pretty rare for a retreat center here. So, well done. But you haven't used, okay. Good, that's nice. And it's quite rare, and this was kind of one of this, because that's what we also have at Jana Grove, in Perth. We have kind of individual rooms for everyone, and that was kind of precisely with this in mind. After reading the sutta, okay, we had to do it this way. No, not quite like that, but basically comes from this idea of the importance of seclusion. That's kind of the idea here. So all of these things basically just mean that you withdraw from the world, gone to the wilderness. In other words, gone away from the civilized world, gone away from villages and houses, etc. That's really all it means. Gone to the root of a tree, rukkamulagato. And this is kind of interesting. In Australia, we don't usually have the full understanding of what the root of a tree can mean. For those of you who have a Sri Lankan background, there's a few of those, you probably have a more understanding of the root of a tree can really be something really spectacular. You can almost live under the tree because the roots kind of spread out in kind of patterns and things. It's almost like a kuti, it's a tree kuti almost. And this vast canopies that protect you from the rain and everything. And that's why in those days they could live like this. Actually, some of the trees you have here, like the Mountain Bay fig trees, actually in Australia, also pretty spectacular. You can maybe live in a similar kind of way with them as well. But in Norway, I don't think you could live at the root of a tree. There's just these needle trees. There's no cover. There's nothing. It's kind of terrible. I don't know. I don't know if Buddhism is ever going to work in Norway. I think we have some serious problems over there. We're trying to establish it, but is it going to work in the snow and the ice of Norway? Uncertain. We shall see. But actually usually does, right? You usually find a way of doing it. You just have to adapt a little bit. You have to be adaptable. And this is one of those things about Buddhism. When it moves around the world, it should always adapt a little bit. We should not hold on too much to the traditions of the country where they came from. It's actually a very important point, in my opinion anyway. And I sometimes feel that people coming from the Asian culture, sometimes they bring too much of the Asian culture with them. I mean, it's nice to bring it for yourself, but when you start a monastery, then you should strive a little bit to go back to the core of what Buddhism is about. We don't need to bring all the Sri Lankan traditions, all the Thai traditions, all the Chinese traditions, or whatever, into Australia. If it's going to work in Australia, it has to be adapted somehow to Australian society. Otherwise, people are going to feel alienated. And if they feel alienated, well, it's not going to work. And so to my mind, that is actually quite important. So I'm so completely sidetracked from what we're talking about, but never mind. So and then, or an empty hut, yeah, Sunyagara gato, and this, yeah, all the way back to the very earliest times, they had kutis, they had huts that they would live in, and especially for the rainy season. It was fascinating. I'm just coming back from India now and seeing the weather over there. I was there for 18 days. I didn't see a drop of rain for those 18 days. And you start to realize that the weather in that's actually very stable. It rains in the rainy season. It does not rain outside. Yeah, it's almost like that. It's like it's a binary kind of weather. And that's very useful. Yes, then you stay put during the rainy season, and then you move about outside of the rainy season. So it has a climate that is very conducive to this way of living, as the monastics do. So then you go to the root of a tree outside the rainy season, and you go at the root of a tree. You go to a hut during the rainy season. So this is kind of how you normally do things. But the point here is seclusion. Yeah, this is a profound practice that requires seclusion. That is what it is saying. That's already very useful information. And then you sit down cross-legged. Palankang abhujitva nisidati, I think, something like that. So palankang is a cross-legged posture, and you sit down. So what does that mean? Does that mean you have to sit cross-legged? Not necessarily. It means that was the standard way of sitting at that time if you meditated. Yeah, people were quite used to it, and when you're used to it, it's very comfortable. Once you get used to it, it's a very steady and comfortable posture. But for many modern people who grow up sitting on chairs or whatever, it can be actually very painful to sit cross-legged, especially for long periods of time. You can do a bit of yoga and things to kind of sort of stretch out your legs and make them more susceptible to the cross-legged position, or more, But be wise about this. Do what works. What matters here is not the exact nature of your posture, but what you can be comfortable with and what you can sustain for the length of your meditation. Yeah, half an hour, an hour and a half, whatever it is that you want to sit. So this is more important. And I know people who have all kinds of postures. Yeah, they meditate, sitting on chairs, leaning against the wall, lying down. Certainly walking meditation is a very important one. My teacher, Ajahn Brahm, is famous for his walking meditation. And this is, you may not know this, but you will know soon, because I'm going to tell you now, so you know soon. So, so Ajahn Brahm is famous for liking concrete. Have any of you been to Bodhinyana Monastery? Yeah, if you come to Bodhinyana Monastery, you see all these roads everywhere, and they're all concrete everywhere, right? Some monasteries, they have gravel, some have earth roads, some maybe have bitumen, but our monastery has like thick concrete everywhere. And sometimes I joke, maybe we should just pave the whole monastery with concrete. I say to Ajahn Brahm, make it easy, we don't have to worry so much. Some monasteries in Thailand, they have concrete trees, yeah? And they paint them green, so they kind of look like they are real trees. That, to me, that's going one step, certainly going many steps too far. And so I was wondering, why is it that Ajahn Brahm likes concrete so much? And the reason is that when he was a young monk in Thailand, many of the young monk stories, he was walking on concrete, and his meditation was so profound that the concrete would kind of explode in kind of shapes and picked in colors and all kind of things. It was the most beautiful thing he had seen in the entire world, with this concrete in this monastery. And it was actually the worst concrete, because he said that in the Dhamma hall they had at Wat Nanachat, a lot of these buildings were built by the local villagers. And the local villagers don't know anything about building, but it's the only workforce available, and they love to help the monastery. That's what they do on their spare time. So they work the rice fields, and maybe in the off-season, and they build things for the monastery. They didn't know how to lay concrete, so the concrete was a bit like this, all over the place. Still, it was the most beautiful concrete in the world. And so then Ajahn Brahm says, okay, more concrete. And so now we have concrete in our monastery here. That's how you get concrete in a monastery here. So the point is, all of these are valuable ways, valuable postures. All of these things are acceptable. Lying down can also be acceptable. There are people, I know a number of people who get good meditation by lying down, but you have to have a fairly strong mindfulness to be able to do that. But you can do that, especially if your body hurts a lot and you have a lot of pain. Some people have lots of pain throughout the body, and lying down is often the only posture that will work for them. That is also okay. If you want to do that on this retreat, you may want to go to the back of the room. It might be better to do that. So don't be too concerned about the posture. The idea of cross-legged is because it is a very sturdy and good posture, and because that is the way it was done at that time in the Buddha, at the time of the Buddha. Interesting, however, is that here we're doing anapanasati, and the Buddha says to sit down. Yeah, he doesn't say do walking meditation with anapanasati. So mindfulness of breathing ideally is done when you sit down. Yeah. Again, you can see why, because it is a profound meditation, and if you want to go really deep, then sitting down is what you want to do. If you go too deep while you're doing walking meditation, you have problems, and it's also much more difficult to go deep when you're doing walking meditation. And so sitting down is really the posture. Again, it points out that this is about profound states of meditation. So. Yeah, this is why I wanted to do this course in the morning as well, Deepika, because I knew this is going to take more time than we normally think. Yeah. So I'm going slowly. I hope you are okay with that. I haven't really got to the meat of the discourse yet, but we will get to that later on. Yeah, or the vegetables of the discourse or whatever we could call it. But we'll get to this later on. So that is all for now. So please keep on enjoying yourself, and then. No, too much. There's so much in the last sentence. There's a lot of information in the last part. Yeah, the last part needs at least half an hour more to finish off the last part there. So. Yeah. So we cannot finish. Yeah. So and what time are we meeting next again, Deepika?